Hey guys, I know it's early. This is a workshop, so you are actually going to be practicing negotiations, so we would love it if people came forward, but the most important thing is that you find a friend. Okay, so you're actually negotiating with someone, so I need you guys to partner up with someone that you're going to go through a two-part negotiation with, so look around, find a happy face, and for at an odd number, we'll recruit people. I'll go outside and pull them in. It's not. Yeah. Welcome. Thanks for coming. We're doing a workshop, and so you'll actually be negotiating, practicing. So if you would love to come up and find a partner, we would love for you guys to partner up with somebody. Great.
Sure. So we'll go ahead and get started. And as people come in, we can have them partner up. So I'm Nicole McCoin. I'm the chair of emergency medicine at Ochsner Medical Center in New Orleans. Thanks, Carmen. This is Dr. Carmen Wolfe. She's the residency program director of Skyline Emergency Medicine in Nashville, Tennessee. And so we're going to talk to you all today about negotiation, particularly how gender may affect negotiation. And we want to thank the AWAEM group and the Faculty Development Committee for sponsoring our talk. So there's a number of factors that may affect negotiation. Obviously, we're going to talk today specifically about gender a bit, but keep in mind that there's other factors as well: sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, that are ethnicity, and all of those factors can actually impact our success in negotiation. And so the question becomes, why is that? And so just to give a little bit of background on the research that's done behind negotiation, decades ago, there was a thought that the concepts behind why women weren't as successful at negotiation was because we didn't ask, and that we had certain traits, kind of stereotypically, collectively, that inhibited us from being successful or hindered us from being successful at negotiation. For example, that we have a higher external locus of control, so we feel a little bit more helpless as a gender to the success and the ongoings of negotiation, that we're willing to accept less, all of these different factors. Well, it turns out, and the response was, you need to just get out there and ask. So there were books entitled Ask More, or Why Don't Women Don't Ask, with the premise that when we don't, that we would have obviously reduced lifetime earnings that are impacted over time, over and over again, and by the end of our career are very significant. And that also downstream effects, we're not getting as much enjoyment out of our work, we're not getting the promotions that we should be getting, and that over time that could have a really negative effect on not only our health and our own selves, but also our institutions. So, turns out that decades later, there was some more research that came about. And we actually are asking. Problem is, we're not getting. So Harvard Business Review, a number of other articles, but the one that we cited here, talk about how we are asking, but there are so many biases out there that we aren't getting the same results. And so the whole point of today is to really sit down and say, what can we do to do it the very best we can so that we can have as much success? Because we're not going to fix the biases in this hour in this room, but we do have control over a lot of factors that could potentially make our negotiations more successful. So this is a slew of texts and articles and books that we have used. Another one that I really like is Getting More by Stuart Diamond. Getting the yes is a really popular text. All of these could be really helpful. We've read all of these, gone to formal courses, and learned from some of these folks. And so it's been really interesting along the journey. We've picked up some pearls, and hopefully they'll help you. All right. Is it working? Here, you want this one?
All right, so we're going to start your workshop. So the workshop has two parts. For those who've come in since we started, this is an active workshop. So you'll actually be practicing negotiating with someone. So we'd love for you to partner up. We've got partners here. I'm not sure if you guys would like to partner the two single individuals here, but we are actually going to be practicing negotiating with one another. Now you'll have different color sheets. You have different roles. And so you'll read your introduction to who you are. And then there will be a first part of the negotiations. So one of you is a real estate developer, and one of you is the president of the neighborhood association. So go ahead and read through your intros. No, you're reading it in your mind. So you have different sheets so you can better understand who you are. And the first phase of this negotiation is to negotiate this donation. So we want you to negotiate with the person with you. You actually need to come up with a number, and we will share and compare those at the end. All right, you should have finished reading about now, and you'll have 5 minutes to negotiate with your partner. And again, come up with a number. We need a number for this donation so we can move forward with the development. All right, I hear some successful negotiations. Has everyone come to a number? If you haven't, you got about 60 seconds to nail down your number. All right, so how did we do on our numbers? I want to shout out, how much are we donating? Developer? 25. All right. 30. Numbers in the back. How much did we donate? 35. 50. Whoa, man, look at that generosity. Okay, so listen to that swing. And so a lot of where you ended up probably depends on what you were able to find out about the other person. Who found out about the blight in the sycamore trees? Right, so you think the sycamores are really precious, and there's no way they'd ever want to cut them down, but actually they're diseased. They have to come out anyways. Right, so getting to something that's behind why something's happening can help you negotiate, rather than thinking this is something precious. The community's going to be so sad to lose these trees. They've got to get those trees out anyways. They'd have to pay to cut them down anyways. And so sometimes getting to those underlying interests can help you negotiate from a different standpoint when you know what the other person, you have a better understanding of what their position is. So as we go through the talk, we'll kind of reference this idea of getting to a number and help you think about how you can more successfully negotiate either a lower or a much higher donation. So we're going to start with the first part about preparation. Now, you've all shown up here today. You didn't even know you'd have to talk during this workshop. Sorry about that. So you really didn't have any time to prepare. So we're going to go over 5 steps that you need to do to prepare for any negotiation. We'll do one more little negotiation, and then we'll talk about kind of these common questions that come up.
Great. So step 1 in this 5-step process that we're going to talk about is really figuring out what you want. And we put this in context of a lot of career change, because we figure most of us are coming in here thinking about not negotiating with a developer, but more negotiating at work for a step up in your roles. And so a big piece of this is really figuring out what you truly want. And spending some time doing some reflection. I think a lot of us kind of get in the rat race of, just what's the next step? I'm going to kind of follow in the footsteps of everyone else and go through these paths, and really giving some solid time to thinking about what really makes you happy, what fits with your life, and what your real goals are, not only, tomorrow or next month, but also in the next few years. And some of that has to do with who you surround yourselves with, who you talk with, what kind of education you get about all of your options. And so I think it's an important piece here to kind of mention that you really need a mentor and a sponsor, if not multiple of those. And they're 2 very different concepts. So the mentor is someone who's been through what you've been through before, kind of understands your plight and whatever is on your mind at the time, and can help give you some guidance, more from personal experience, some more personal interaction. Sponsors are folks who are a little bit perhaps higher up in a role in the organizational structure, maybe are not quite as close and personal with you about talking about these day-to-day issues, but really have a network that you could benefit from. So they're the ones getting the emails in their inbox every day about opportunities. And if, these are like the chair of your department or folks in the C-suite, if you have a sponsor who knows what your interests are and your goals are and is looking out for you and can connect you with those opportunities, you're gonna have more success in getting to those goals faster. So you really need both of those. And then lastly, coaching. Professional coaching can be pricey. There's a great way to kind of shop for coaches online with this international. There's an International Federation of Coaching. It's a very reputable site. But this may be something that you use particularly when you're at a crossroads in your career where you're making a big jump from one step to another, from one geographic area to another, and you're really having to kind of organize your thoughts and goals in a very intense and serious way. That's when the coach can be super helpful if you're going to have to figure out when to invest in that in your career.
All right. So the next step is to think about what you need to learn beforehand. Now, you didn't really have an opportunity to learn about this playground. I tried to give you a couple of anchors so that you can understand some general cost, but we have the benefit, if you're doing a real negotiation, that you can really get a lot of this homework done before you get started. You've got to get objective data. So if you're negotiating a salary, you've got to get the AAMC data, the MGMA data, to understand what are those percentile brackets so that you can start negotiating in the right place. The more you know about the landscape going in, the better you'll know what to ask for. The worst case scenario is going into one of these negotiations not knowing even the range of what they're planning to offer. That's how you end up with a agreement that isn't quite beneficial if you have no idea what the range is. Right, when you are the developer, right, you're willing to pay up to $50,000. That doesn't seem like that much. You're about to make millions. Whereas you're the neighborhood president, you'd be grateful for anything. You'd be grateful for 10, 20, 50, 25,000. And so depending on who has the data and who's willing to say that number first is going to depend a lot about, or is going to determine a lot about where you end up there. So get that objective data as you move forward. So it's not just data. There are other things that will determine who has the upper hand in a negotiation. So information here, that's that second horseman. This is a great paper out of the business literature. And so information is only a part of that. Having alternatives is really an important part. So knowing what your alternatives and having explored those alternatives, but also exploring the alternatives of your partner that you're negotiating with, knowing what they can exit to, right? If you don't come to some type of agreement, what will be their plan B, and then knowing what your plan B is as well. And then the other two horsemen, just knowing, who has the general upper hand as far as status and social capital, who you know, and kind of what position you occupy within the organization.
All right, so the next step is defining your strategy. And this is the part that I think just takes a lot of thought. When you're going into a negotiation, you need to kind of set your target value and your reservation value. Your target value is like the pie in the sky aspirational goals that you have, and it could be multifactorial, right? It could be not just how much money you're going to make per year, but it could be the resources that you get in the job, or where your office is, or whatever things are important to you. But you have some sort of combination of the pie in the sky, and that's the target that you're going for. And then you can see in the middle there's a reservation value. The reservation value is the lowest that you're willing to accept before you go down a different avenue with Plan B. And the reservation value is really important because if you don't set what the lowest combination of factors is that you're willing to accept, you're going to go even lower, right? And so you got to kind of set your boundaries before you go into the conversation. And then the last piece is something called the BATNA. And the BATNA stands for Best Alternative to a Negotiated Agreement. And it turns out that if you have a better BATNA, you're going to have more success in your negotiation. So think about this. If you're, like, hypothetically speaking, if you're a program director and you really want to, you think it might be fun to live in Boston and you're living in Alabama, and but you're really happy with your job and you've got a great work family and you have all the pieces and parts that you need and you're pretty happy, but you've always just really wanted to live up there, and maybe the salary is like $10,000 more, and you want to. You might get an extra APD and a few extra resources. If you go into that negotiation and you're really happy with whatever your BATNA is, staying back in Alabama and doing your original job, if you're comfortable with that, you're going to go into the negotiation with more confidence because you don't feel as nervous about, oh, what am I going to lose? And I've really got to get this opportunity. And so spend some time thinking about what is my best alternative. And the stronger you can make that best alternative, the better your negotiation is going to be. And here's kind of a framework to think about it. So you really want to think about the BATNA as like the complete opposite fork in the road. So this is like you walk away and you're going to go with a completely different plan.
All right, so let's talk for just a second about anxiety. When you start thinking about negotiating, I know a lot of people get that feeling in their stomach, you start to get nervous, you're gonna have to go in, talk to your boss, and ask for something. So what do we do about that anxiety? Well, what we know doesn't work is just to tell people just to calm down. Have you ever tried to do that when you feel real nervous? Just calm down, just take a deep breath, everything's gonna be okay. So instead of doing that, what I'd like to suggest is something from the psychology literature. So instead of trying to tamp down this high arousal state that you have, it's really hard to do that and tell your body not to be in this state, but you actually can reinterpret that anxiety as excitement. This is not just a mind trick, this really works. It's been proven to work with things like public speaking, singing, test taking, that you can't get rid of that energy that you feel, so you may as well generate it or push it towards something else, and excitement is that thing that you want to push towards. So you see this as an opportunity, not as something that you have to do, an opportunity to improve whatever position or status, whatever that you're doing. The other thing that's great about this is it's not something that your body gets used to. You're not going to develop a tolerance to this. You actually just get better at it the more you practice. So the more often you use this trick, the more often you'll be able to, in other cases, reinterpret what you're feeling on a shift, have something you're feeling anxious as excitement opportunity. So I think that that's a neat thing. This is not a way to trick yourself. It's a way to use your body's own feelings and just change the way you perceive them into a different way. Another thing that will help with anxiety is to go ahead and imagine the worst alternative to a negotiated agreement. So as Dr. McCoin said, your best alternative is what's the best case scenario if you can't come to an agreement with this person. But go ahead and imagine the worst thing that can happen, because when you get into the negotiating room, that thing might be in the back of your mind. So beforehand, before you get there, go all the way down the rabbit hole. Just chase that rabbit as far as it goes. And usually when you get to the bottom of the rabbit hole, you'll see you're still alive, everything's still okay, like things are gonna be all right. And so if you've already imagined the worst that can happen beforehand, it's going to give you a lot more confidence when you get into the room, because you don't hold that anxiety. You've already explored it, and even if that option happens, things will be okay. And then the final thing is to address our imposter syndrome. It talks on this at CORD and SAEM every year. Imposter syndrome is what it is. We all feel this to some degree. So what I'd encourage you to do is think of one of the most famous imposters that ever lived. That was Superman. So get your Superman clothes on, your earrings on, call someone who really loves you, who can help pump you up before you go in there, and approach this from a place of confidence. If you're coming in with data, knowing what's important to you and knowing what is possible, what is reasonable to ask for, that's going to give you a lot of confidence going in and dispel a lot of the anxiety that you feel.
All right, and the last piece of this portion of the talk is really talking about setting up for success. So there are actual entire books written on timing and place and your focus, right? And so these are really important things to think about. So put yourself in the shoes of the person or people with whom you're negotiating, and think about when you're approaching them and how it would feel from their perspective. So in other words, if you're asking your chair for an extra 20 grand to do some project, picking 8 a.m. on a Monday morning is probably not the best time to make the appointment to meet with the chair, right? You got to think about, they're coming in, they've got like 100 emails in their inbox already, people are calling them, things are happening, and so they don't have that same relaxed, jovial approach typically at that time of day. The more you know about the people with whom you're negotiating, the better, because some people are more morning people, some people are more afternoon people. Some people do a lot better right after they've eaten. So there's a lot of data to say, don't go in early in the week, go in a little later in the week, maybe right after lunchtime. Not so late, not Friday at 4:30 where their mind is already, at dinner, but maybe Friday at 1. And so there's actually some strategy to this. The other piece is your timing and what you're doing before you go in. So you're never as effective if you have been in a traffic jam, you're running late, you're sweating, you're already stressed out, and then you're coming in to have this conversation. So you need to be a little selfish and do whatever you need to do to get your mind right before you're having these serious conversations and high stakes conversations. If that means going to yoga, going to run, whatever it may be, do whatever it is, be super early, be relaxed when you're going into the conversation. And then the last piece is the exit. So remember, you don't have to finish the negotiation in that one setting. So if things aren't going the way you had planned in your mind, and you're really not getting to any endpoint that makes any sense to you, you can always say, hey, I got a lot to think about. Maybe if we could just take a couple of days, maybe regroup on Monday, or maybe not Monday, right? Wednesday of next week, and talk this through and kind of come to a resolution that'll give me some time to get my thoughts together. That's okay. It's okay to leave the negotiation without the actual plan executed. So that's the last piece. Just think about the timing of this. So now we're going to have you've got your second sheet. We're going to give you a minute or two to kind of read through the second piece and then negotiate the final portion of the scenario. It's just kind of a continuation of the initial.
All right, we're looking for a vision here. So at the end, we'll kind of share what type of agreements you guys came to. All right, one more minute to wrap up. All right. Lots of good discussions going on out there. Has anyone reached any type of vision of what this might look like that they'd like to share? All right, let's hear the vision. Perfect. Oh, I love it. And walking trails. Oh, awesome. Okay, but all single-family homes. Okay, all right. What did you guys end up with? Oh, still negotiating, driving a hard bargain. Not agreeing so quickly this time, huh? What? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's fair. Yeah. All right. Any visions from the back? Okay. Yep. Take a pause. Yep. Great. All right. What about you guys?
We're happy with single-family homes. We're trying to discuss whether there could be another phase.
Ah, yes.
Those extra ones that they wanted somewhere else.
Right, so that this goes well, there's potential for things in the future. All right, so hopefully we've touched on a lot of the issues around negotiation. In the next section, we're going to go through the 5 most common conundrums that kind of come up when you talk about negotiation, when people ask questions about what they should actually be doing. So this is the practical portion, like what you should actually be saying and doing when you go into a negotiation. So one of the things about negotiation is that when you ask people how things went, that when people perceive the success of the negotiation, it's based more about how they feel about the negotiation than always the exact number or agreement that's come to. So psychology here is just as important as business, and that's why a lot of what we're going to present actually comes from the psychology literature. Because if people feel better about the way that the negotiation went, they're actually more likely to accept a lower number or value than maybe they even originally intended. So it's not manipulation, it's helping the person that you're negotiating with feel good about the outcome that you come to. So first is, what do I actually say? I'm going to have to sit down with my chair, my boss, my somebody, and what am I going to say to open things up? So the first thing I'll say is, don't say anything, just start asking questions, okay? So why are we asking these questions? It's because we're trying to get to what is under your position. So usually you come into a negotiation, someone's at point A, someone's at point B, and those are your positions that you hold. This is what I have to have or have to come to. But that's not the whole story. We know that there's a lot below that, and what's below that are the interests. And the only way to get at the interest are to ask questions. So just like in the beginning part when you're talking about the trees, like how do they feel about the trees, the health of the trees, how long they've been there, what is the plans for the community regarding the trees. If you've got to get underneath just the playground to the interest at hand to realize actually both of you want the same thing. Both of you want the trees out, rather than it being, I want the trees out, I don't want the trees out. Everybody wants the trees removed. So if you can get down to the why, that is the most important part, and that's why you ask questions. You always start a negotiation with a question. So the other thing is using questions to help develop what we call tactical empathy. Okay, so the more you understand about the person sitting across the table from you, the better you can truly help come to an agreement that benefits both parties. Okay, so these are ways to employ tactical empathy by asking questions, by actively listening, by repeating back to people what you hear them saying. So if someone, says, well, I can't do that because budgets are tight. You start your next sentence with, budgets are tight. That's why I'm making a few proposals that will help not only, save on the bottom line, but also bring value to our department. So you mirror what the person has said using the last few words of their previous sentence to help start your next sentence. That helps show that you're actively listening to them and that you can build upon that you guys are actually coming at this from the same team rather than being opponents. And then finally, using calibrated questions. So you want them to go ahead and imagine you in the position. So if you're applying for program director, what would it take for me to be successful in my first year as a program director, right? You're already putting yourself in that position. During my first year as chair, what would be the major goals that you'd like for me to accomplish, so that they're already thinking about you in that position. So it's asking questions, but asking questions in a way that calibrates the conversation in the direction that you want it to go, already assuming that you're going to be in this position, that you're going to be taking this leadership role, and then imagining what it's like from there. So don't say anything, just ask questions to start. All right, the other thing is you actually don't have to say anything sometimes. If you are negotiating with someone and you are just willing to pause, I'm sure you've seen it happen before. Someone makes a statement, there's a pause. The person might actually start to make a rebuttal to their own statement that they just made, because people hate having empty space there. And so they will fill it with anything. They'll start, well, you might think that this, they'll come back even contradicting what they just said if you're just willing to pause. And sometimes the person who wins is who's willing to pause the longest. So be comfortable with the pause, be comfortable with time, and let the other person do more of the talking. You be the question person and you be the patient person, and let that other person kind of talk through it in their head. All right, so what if they ask you a difficult question, right? Everyone reads the same books, so you're asking them questions, they're asking you questions, nobody wants to answer anything. So what are you gonna do when they ask you difficult questions? So one of the famous quotes from negotiating is, the most dangerous word in business to say is no. And the second most dangerous is yes. But it's possible to negotiate without ever saying either. Yeah, this is what always frustrates me when I talk with a business person, right? It's always, it depends, or we'll see. And so you can play that game as well. So if people are asking you questions that are difficult to answer or that aren't beneficial for you to answer, you've got to reframe the question. So don't be tricked into an ultimatum or a this or that. There's always another answer rather than yes or no or A or B. So help to reframe whatever question that they ask you, right? Is it A or B? I can't see A or B either making both of us happy. Let's think about C, another way to imagine this problem, right? So you can reframe anything that they give you, and it's really important to do that and not fall into the trap that someone sets for asking you one specific question. All right, if there's an underlying concern, there's some type of elephant in the room, go ahead and address it. If you know that, they're going to ask you a question about X and you're nervous, maybe something, a project that you did that never came to completion, right? And you know that that's in the back of their mind, they know about that. Go ahead and address it. If there's going to be an elephant in the room, they're going to ask you a difficult question. It's okay to come bring that to the forefront, address whatever's there to make sure that you can, make sure there's no lingering things in their mind to say that you don't deserve this position or you don't deserve the raise or whatever it is that you're asking for. And then finally, reference your objective data. You've all done your homework because you knew how to prepare, and go back to that objective data over and over and over again. It's very easy to argue about feelings, conceptions, visions, but objective data is data. And so if you have a way to come back to something that is concrete, something that is able to be looked up, checked, that is something that is factual, it's nice to be able to come back to that with these questions rather than having to negotiate around thoughts or feelings. All right, this is my favorite part, is getting to the number, right? Who says the number? How do you get to the number? So when you guys were negotiating earlier for your playground amount, how should you have approached this? Well, there's two schools of thought, okay? The first school of thought is what everyone's always been taught. It's that you make them say the number first. Definitely they should say the number. This is what is conventional. And in an unknown landscape where you have no idea how much playgrounds cost, it's a fine strategy because you have no idea if they're going to be willing to pay 10 or 50,000 or maybe even 100,000, right? So let them say the number first because maybe they're considering, like in this case, they're considering like $50,000 to $80,000. They'd be willing to pay that much, right? So let them say that number first, and on the inside you might be like, wow, they started with 45. That's twice as much as I ever thought that I would get, right? But then you know where they're negotiating from, so you can see their cards once they tell you that initial number. So that's why that wisdom's there. And sure, if you don't know anything about what you're doing, that is the way to go. However, what I'd like to say is that for most of us who do have a known landscape for things like salary, et cetera, that actually saying the number first is more beneficial, okay? So if you know the landscape, you can use anchoring bias to help you. So let's talk about anchoring bias, and then we'll talk about the benefits of each of these. So this was the first paper on anchoring bias from the mid-'70s in psychology literature. So they got random people, they asked them a question. What % of African countries are in the UN? Okay, and then they had a roulette wheel there. The person spun the roulette wheel, and it was set to either stop at 10 or 65. And so they asked the person, okay, that's a hard question. So is it higher or lower than 10? Is it higher or lower than 65? So they'd say higher or lower. And then they asked the person to give a number estimate. For the person or the people whose roulette wheel had stopped on 10, the median estimate was 25. And if your roulette wheel had stopped on 65, your median estimate was 45, right? There's no reason, who actually knows the % of African countries in the UN? I don't, but that wasn't the point of this. The point was that once you're anchored at a number, you're more likely to guess closer to that number, and the same thing happens in a negotiation. Another one of my favorite anchoring bias examples was this one. What are the last 2 digits of your social security number, right? You say those. Then they bring out a bottle of wine. How much would you pay for this bottle? Right? Just a bottle, nothing special. And you can see that the lower that number was of your social security number, right, something random that has nothing to do with wine, still affected the average that people would estimate that they would pay for this random bottle out there. That's how our brains work, right? Once you get anchored on something, it's really, really hard to get away. And that's why this is helpful in a known landscape, because you have the ability to place the anchor. The higher, if you're talking about salaries, the higher the first number that's thrown out, the higher that initial anchor is, the higher the negotiated agreement will be. That has been proven time and time again. So don't be afraid to ask for those numbers, because the higher you anchor, the better outcome you're going to end up with. So what do you do if the other side anchors? What if you get anchored, right? They throw out something that is just, completely too low. So we'll do, random salaries. You're applying for some job and you think you should probably make, somewhere like 180, right? And they throw out 110, okay? The most important thing is not to fall for the anchor. You should never counter an anchor. So you should never say, okay, they said 110, I'll say 160, right? Or even 170. You've got to diffuse the anchor completely, right? So saying things like, I hear that 110 is a fair price that you think should be paid for this. However, we are miles apart here. And unless we can start this negotiation between 200 and 300, I'm not sure we can move forward, right? So you've got to recognize the anchor and not fall for it. Never counter offer on an anchor that's out of your range. Completely diffuse it and restart the negotiation. When you do restart the negotiation, use data to back it up, right? Because you don't want to seem like you're unwilling to negotiate, right? We're miles apart because 200 to 300 is actually, the median quartile for someone with my level of experience for this type of position. That's according to MGMA data, right? So you've just referenced something that is objective that they could look up, and you completely move the anchor to another range. So what are the difference in these two things? It is whether or not you know the landscape. And that's why the homework piece is so important, because the more you know, the better you'll be able to negotiate going in. So if you don't know the landscape, you have no way to figure this out, sure, let them say a number. And actually, when they do studies on this, having the other person say the number makes people more satisfied with the negotiation because they have less anxiety about it. It's easier not to be that first person, right? Saying the first number is anxiety inducing. So sure, if you want a happy, comfortable negotiating experience, fine, let them say the other number. But if the economic outcome is what you care about, you've got to be brave. You have to be the one to do the anchoring. All right, so what number do I say? So this is certainly extremely specific to what you're doing. So it's really important to talk to a mentor before you go through this. First, give a range when it's appropriate. When you're talking about your MGMA data, give them the median quartile, give them the 50th to 75th percentile range, right? Give them some range, because we all know that's never about one single number. It's about lots of other things that go into it as well, other benefits and things that you want, things that are important to you. So give that range to allow for some flexibility back and forth. Next is, if you can be precise about a number, that helps with your negotiation. So when you talk about anchoring, you want to anchor in the type of, in the range, but you also want to anchor in the scale. So if you're going to pawn a ring and you're going to go in and you really want, $700 for it, right? Going in and saying, how about, $720, they're going to be more likely to negotiate in smaller increments than if you go in and say $700, then they're going to be more likely to negotiate in the hundreds, so to come back and say $500. Whereas if you give a number that's in the tens, like $720 or $724, they're going to be more likely to negotiate in the tens place rather than the hundreds place, and that's been shown over and over again in the literature. So if you have the ability to be that precise, if it's something that you're negotiating, that's always better as well. And then finally, stop apologizing. I think we say this all the time. I'm sorry, but I just can't take less than 200. I'm sorry, but don't apologize. Just justify. You're not sorry. That's what you deserve, and that's what you're asking for. So don't apologize for it. Just justify it with numbers. All right, next. A lot of people don't like to negotiate because they're afraid of the relationship, right? I don't want to make someone mad. I have to work with this person forever. So absolutely, proceed graciously. Be a kind negotiator. Especially if you're going to need to do more deals or negotiate with this person in the future, right? You're going to work with someone for years to come. It's best to be generous as you go. You don't always have to get everything out of every single negotiation because there's likely to be more in the future. And one of my favorite quotes, if you're going to skin a cat, don't keep it as a house cat, right? So if they're really, looking to get every single bit that you can, you might make enemies. And so generosity really does have its place in negotiation as well. If you're going to have to tell someone that they're definitely not getting something, and it's going to be multiple things, do it all at the same time. So satisfaction with the negotiation decreases when people have multiple losses that are spread out. So if you're going to have to do something like rip the Band-Aid off, go ahead and tell them all three things they can't have right at once. But if you know you're going to be able to be generous and give things to people in the negotiation, spread them out. Because every time you give something, the person feels inside that they've won. Okay, so let them win over and over again. Because again, it's about satisfaction with the negotiation as much as the agreement that you get to. All right, and finally, delaying acceptance. So if you go in and someone says, well, I'll give you $30,000, you're like, okay, that sounds great. Then the person that said 30 is like, was that too much? Should I have said less? Right, so if you agree right away to something, it makes the other person less satisfied with the negotiation because they feel like they could have gotten more. So even if you know you're going to stay around that amount, there is some benefit to saying, well, let's talk a little bit more, and delaying that acceptance, because that will actually increase the satisfaction of the other person that you are negotiating with. And then finally, there's a fine line between gloating and celebrating. So do your celebrations in private. No gloating about how well you did, especially in front of that person. And finally, this is a lot of what Dr. McCoin talked about, was pressure tactics. People will always try to get you to come to an agreement in that initial negotiation. It's better for them if you go ahead and say yes or no, or are pressured into taking something, rather than realizing, well, that's not as good as my BOTNA, so I should probably walk away from this. So have a way to slow down, have a specific exit strategy that Dr. Nicole mentioned before, so some type of pause with the knowledge of when you're going to come back to something. And then finally, don't be tricked into closing the deal, right? That phrase is in our society and our culture, got to close the deal, got to seal the deal. Sealing the deal sometimes is not what you want to do. Once you get to what the deal is going to be, if that is not as good as your BATNA, you've got to walk away. And sometimes walking away actually means winning, okay? So don't get bullied into finishing something. It's okay to take a break and move forward. All right, that is it. Those are the 5 most common things that people ask us about, and we'll take questions.
One thing my boss used to tell me about, I didn't have the answer for them. I knew that, I basically knew you used to do your homework, know what the standard is, what people, because this was I was negotiating for. It wasn't money as much, but it was hospital sites and opportunities, that I knew other people were getting. And his response to me was, I don't want to talk about other people, let's just focus on what you. And it was very frustrating, because it was like, I was clearly saying, I know this is possible. I know other physicians in our department have been able to manage X, Y, and Z, or have had this opportunity and worked with this, and it was like, don't want to talk about other people, I want to talk about you. And that was just like a non-starter for me, and I had this visceral reaction. And then, can you give me a good response for that?
Yeah, I think that, so he's reframing. So he's doing exactly what we tell people to do, right? So reframe that question instead of responding to this, completely turning around, don't compare apples to apples. This is a different situation, it sounds like, is what he was saying to you. Yeah, I think that when people come in with things like that, I think you agree, that's fine. Let's do focus on me. So when I look at my goals, whatever reason you're trying to work at these other sites, here are my ultimate goals, and here's what I'm trying to get to, which is why working at these sites is going to increase my academic portfolio, or whatever you're trying to argue for. So I think it's fine if someone has said we're not going to use that objective data, right, and they've taken that off the table. I don't think you can force them to do it. But what you can do is say, okay, I can't use that pathway. I've got to turn and find a different pathway. So I'd find whatever other reason that you have. Sure, I see your boss's point, comparing you to other people, right? Everyone's a different employee. But for you, why is this important? For you, why is it going to make a difference? And so if he wants to bring it back to you, fine, bring it back to you and find ways to argue for what you're going for based on your goals.
In the same vein, you can also use the technique of saying, how do you see me in whatever role you're going for, in that role? Start your sentence with, when I'm working at blank, or as we move forward with our conversation, if you see me working at blank, how do you see me in this role? So that he's already thinking about you in a context of this role and this job. So if he wants to focus on you all day long. How do you see me in this role? How do you see this working out? And really, totally steer the conversation in a different direction. And sometimes I think that those who, if the chair, whoever this is you're negotiating with, they may feel nervous talking about other people's data. And so I think the other thing is, sure, he may have been using this as a reframing tactic, but also kind of giving the benefit of the doubt of maybe he feels uncomfortable talking about the other people's data. So let's look at other data we have that's a more general group of data about how this works at other institutions. Or, you can also kind of reframe it that way and counter what he's saying. So.
All right, thank you guys for coming.
These are little worksheets to help you kind of think through your negotiations ahead of time. So we'll give them to you on the way out.